Hello, friends. Today we're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions and businesses becoming bigger businesses by buying businesses. Of course, this is all sort of inspired by recent events with the acquisition of Tonic Games Group, owners of Mediatonic, makers of Fall Guys, by Epic Games. Now, this is very reminiscent of their acquisition of Psyonix, who were the creators of Rocket League. This acquisition means that Epic Games is gaining even more control over the industry, however small that level of control is. But whenever you have these companies, these big corporations buying other smaller companies, it really makes you sort of concerned about the future of the industry. And this isn't just exclusive to video games. Obviously, there's a lot of that going on with movies right now, and we'll get into that. But let's take a little trip through recent video game acquisitions, and then we will also talk about the economic concept, I guess you could call it, of vertical and horizontal integration. So this acquisition of Tonic Games Group, Mediatonic, by Epic Games isn't that concerning compared to other acquisitions. Primarily, personally, for me, I feel this way because it's a private company. Epic Games, like Valve, are private companies. So unlike, say, Microsoft or EA, they are not completely at the whims of profit margins, and they're able and willing and more often get into things that aren't just purely about profit. Now, that doesn't mean that these corporations aren't still out to make money. You know, they're not these benefactors of humanity. They're not these righteous sort of figures, but I do personally view them in a better light than publicly traded corporations. However, it is still slightly concerning when you consider what happened to Campo Santo, the last acquisition that Valve made, and they were the creators of Firewatch, and they also had a game in development. I think it was announced in 2016. It's called In the Valley of the Gods, or In the Valley of Gods, and that has been put on indefinite hold, which is unfortunate for people who are looking forward to that, but that's kind of just like a Valve thing. We can see that through the Epic Games acquisitions that these companies are, yes, they're joining, they like to say they're joining the Epic Games family to make it sound less weird and businesslike, but they're continuing doing what they were normally doing. However, most of us know that Valve works weirdly, and a direct quote from the Campo Santo, CEO, main guy, was "Valve time makes fools of us all," which, so they got involved in other projects like Half-Life Alyx at the time. I believe this was announced in 2019, and now it's 2021, and I doubt we'll ever see In the Valley of Gods. But so going further back, we have the December 2020 acquisition of Codemasters by Electronic Arts, and this was for $1.2 billion. Now, in a more recent article, they did insist that they would operate independently, meaning Codemasters would operate independently from EA, and that it was just like EA was buying all of Codemasters. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. I think that's kind of just a way of EA being like, oh no, don't worry, our past history of us buying and closing down studios isn't going to happen this time. But either way, EA owns them, and they will do whatever they want. The biggest and craziest and most mind-blowing recent acquisition was, of course, Microsoft buying ZeniMax, which is the parent company of Bethesda, for $7.5 billion. This happened around September of 2020, and I don't think the deal is like officially gone through, but they are in the process of acquiring them. And Bethesda is, of course, the publisher of Doom, Wolfenstein, Fallout, the Elder Scrolls series. And in terms of franchises, yes, like that's a big deal. However, if we look at the sales and the state of the board of executives, it's not that surprising. There's a good Polygon article that explains this, that their more recent games, even though they're like a profitable company and they make good games and they sell decently, they're nowhere near the level of something like Activision or EA or Microsoft in terms of like pumping out numbers. However, Microsoft saw this as an opportunity to get the rights to a lot of beloved franchises, and that's what they did. They're not really concerned about the profitability of Wolfenstein 2, but they would like for people to sign up for Game Pass. And if they can put all their games on Game Pass, that's a huge bump in the value of that service. Not counting the acquisition of Bethesda and all of its studios, the Microsoft Game Studios umbrella encompasses 15 studios. Of course, not all of these studios are ones that they founded, and quite a few of them are studios that they bought in very recent times, including Compulsion Games. In 2018, they made Contrast and We Happy Few. Double Fine Productions in 2019, obviously Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, Broken Age. In Exile Entertainment, they are the Wasteland folks. They bought them in 2018. Mojang, famously, they bought Mojang in 2014, developers of Minecraft, for a lot of money. And by a lot of money, I mean $2.5 billion. In 2018, they also acquired Ninja Theory. These are the the Hellblade people, but also the DMC Devil May Cry people, and Heavenly Sword, Enslaved, Odyssey to the West. Obsidian Entertainment, of course, the Fallout New Vegas dudes, and more recently, The Outer Worlds. Playground Games, they do the Forza Horizon series, and they're working on the next Fable game. They were purchased in 2018. Famously, Rare bought in 2002 in order to bolster their original Xbox game lineup. They made Grabbed by the Ghoulies, classic, and Cameo, the launch title for the Xbox 360. Finally, in 2018, they bought Undead Labs, who were the State of Decay folks. And now, of course, we have like Machine Games and Bethesda Game Studios and Arcane. So there's quite a few studios in this lineup now. For me, this brought to mind a recent merger that is just absurd and should have never been allowed to happen, and that is Disney buying 21st Century Fox for $71.3 billion, and this was in March of 2019. This deal has resulted in probably the single largest media company ever. Similar mergers include Comcast buying NBC Universal in 2011 for $13.75 billion, and Viacom's purchase of CBS in 2019 for $15.4 billion. Hey folks, quick editing Chan here from the future. I don't know how I neglected to talk about this merger out of all of the mergers, but AT&T bought Time Warner for $85 billion. And this is arguably the biggest The Disney one with Fox is pretty crazy, but I mean, if you just take a look at this image, I mean, oh my God, that is just insane. Look at all those brands. Look at that. Look at how much. Ooh, man. Ooh. Look at that monopoly. Ooh. When you look at the amount of media and IP and franchises that the Walt Disney Corporation owns now, it is absolutely absurd. And like I said, I don't think that this sort of stuff should be allowed. Obviously, when it comes to like lobbyists and just money, these companies are going to get away with it. You know, you would think that antitrust laws and monopolies, etc., would prevent stuff like this from happening, but when you have former executives from the company working on the board of the FCC and stuff like that, like it's they're just gonna get away with stuff that otherwise, you know. So these deals are good examples of total vertical integration, wherein these companies control every aspect of the entertainment industry. So this means that Disney now owns the studios that makes the content, the intellectual properties being used, like Marvel. They have the distribution rights and the streaming platform that it appears on. So Disney Plus is just a way for Disney to make 100% of the profits. This sort of brings us back to the golden age of Hollywood. And while this might sound like a good thing, it was not. This refers to the control of the entire process, and when this control was even tighter. This was back in like the beginning of film, basically like the 20s and 30s. What was known as the Big Five was a collection of 5 studios that owned everything from the studios, like where the movies were made, to the theaters, and even the actors for years at a time, in what was called the star system. These actors and actresses would sign these contracts, these exclusivity contracts. It's like if Hugh Jackman was signing a 5-year contract with Disney to where he was only in Disney movies for 5 years, and he had to do a certain amount of them, and he had to even like act and dress a certain way while he was in public, and they controlled these people's lives, essentially. So imagine if the entire film industry was controlled by just 5 companies. You would hope that they would get broken up, and that's exactly what happened in this huge antitrust bust, where these companies were broken up into, you know, this company owns like the lots, and this company owns the theaters, and this company owns, you know, so it's not just all a few companies that own every part of the industry. But of course, as you can tell, they've slowly sort of reassembled into the Big Five once again. Here's a fun fact. In 1984, 50 independent media companies owned the majority of media interests within the United States. So television stations, movie studios, record companies, etc. But by 2011, 90% of the United States media was controlled by 6 media conglomerates. General Electric / Comcast, they owned NBC and Universal. News Corp, which was Fox News, Wall Street Journal, New York Post. Disney, ABC, ESPN, Pixar. Viacom, MTV, BET, Paramount Pictures. Time Warner, CNN, HBO, Warner Bros., and CBS, including Showtime and NFL.com. Now, after the mergers, that number has shrunk to about 4 media conglomerates. Now, I'm sure most of you are connecting the dots to similar situations in video games, and how Microsoft and EA and Activision are essentially these giant media conglomerates, but for video games. But to really understand all of this, I think it is important to talk about vertical and horizontal integration. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I feel like I'm a smart boy, and I know the basics of this concept and these concepts, and I would like to relay this information to you, just a basic version of it to explain this in terms of the video game industry. If you would like a more detailed explanation, there are plenty of videos on YouTube. You could read the Wikipedia page like I did. So let's think about this in terms of a few different companies, and we'll go through this and we'll explain how those companies work in terms of their integration. So I broke this down very simple, just into 5 parts, even though there are far more than that, but these are the main parts that people think about and talk about. So first we have the tech/tools, which is like the engines, right? Unreal Engine, that's tech, that's tools, or perhaps DirectX 11, DirectX 12. We have the developers, obviously, the people who make the games, the publisher, the people, and that's sort of a encompassing sort of like finance, marketing, etc. You could break publisher down into multiple parts, but we'll just say publisher to make it simple. We have the platform, so like a console or a phone. And then we have the storefront, so let's think Epic Games Store or Steam. So in terms of Microsoft, they're a good example of a company that has complete vertical integration of the market. They have the tech/tools. Obviously, they use some of other companies' tech and tools to make their games. However, that's getting into horizontal integration. They have developers, and what they're currently doing right now is they are horizontally integrating more and more developers into their wheelhouse, right? By buying studios to make games for them, now they have 15 plus studios. They are horizontally integrating in terms of this tech tree, let's say. Publisher, they publish their own games. They don't hardly ever work with other publishers. They do their own thing. They don't have to worry about it. Platform, well, Microsoft is a crazy example in this in this tree, because they have the Xbox, they have Windows, and you could even say like they have they have xCloud, right? So you don't even you could just do this on your phone. So they're integrating horizontally in that case. You could say that making different SKUs of the Xbox Series S and X, that's even more horizontal integration. Storefront, well, they have the storefront on the Xbox, right? The Xbox Marketplace or whatever it's called, and then they have the Windows Store. I mean, no one really uses that to my knowledge, but they do have a storefront. So as you can see, Microsoft is very horizontally and vertically integrated in terms of the industry. They have tons of developers at their disposal. They have a lot of control over the platforms and storefronts, and they have a lot of internal tech and tools. Now let's think about this in terms of the sort of subject of this video, Epic Games. They are the creators of a extremely popular creation, development, rendering engine used in all parts of media now. I mean, if you look at the behind the scenes of The Mandalorian, right, they're using Unreal Engine to make basically every part of that show. Of course, they develop their own games, and they are acquiring other developers. So when they buy companies like Mediatonic, they are integrating horizontally. We have them as a publisher. They publish games, but not really. I mean, I'll give them a square there, and that's sort of just because they have their own storefront, but we're getting there. But they're not out here publishing games like EA or Activision. The platform, well, this is one that Epic doesn't have. They don't have their own platform, like their own console or the PC or something like that. However, they do have their own storefront. So having your own storefront on PC basically means that you don't really need control over a platform. However, it's true. They aren't vertically integrated in that aspect of games. But speaking about the storefront, there is a lot of competition going on right now, and in the last several years, you have these companies like EA and Ubisoft, and like recently Rockstar with their games launcher thing. I don't know what they were, but anyways, you have these companies trying to make their own sort of storefronts, and that's because when you sell on Steam takes a cut. But you're on their platform, and even though they do take a cut of your sales, developers continue to put their games on Steam, and even more often now, because like EA did their thing with Origin, and they realized that they would rather have the exposure of Steam and the player base of Steam to get into their games rather than making the full cut on their smaller store. Next, let's talk about EA. Now, EA sort of has tech and tools. You know, they have things like the Frostbite engine, but you see games like Apex Legends, for instance. You see games like Jedi Fallen Order that are using things like the Source engine or Unreal 4. So in terms of tech and tools, they're there. They have their own tech because they're big enough, but not really. Developers. Well, EA is buying up developers. They bought Respawn. They bought Codemasters. They're building up their horizontal integration in terms of studios. Publisher. Well, yeah, they have a lot of power there. They are a big publisher who's publishing games, and they have no problem in terms of financing and promoting advertising games. Platform. Does EA have their own platform? No, they don't. Moving on to storefront. They do have their own storefront. It's not that powerful. Origin isn't very popular, and I could see it maybe going away in the next 10 years. And of course, if you wanted to do like Nintendo, for instance, you could go like this and boom. They have a platform, they've got the eShop, they publish games, they've got developers, but they're not really horizontally interested in integrating more developers into their wheelhouse. I believe there was a recent studio that they bought. I also want to point out that the more digital sales that these companies are making and the fewer physical box copies of games that they're selling means that they get a bigger cut. So they have more integration in the industry. They don't have to rely on some store like GameStop to make them money. They're cutting out that middleman and becoming even more integrated. All of that being said, however, I have hope. This is not a downer video. This is a, hey, watch out, things are happening in the industry. However, video games are different. Movies, it's a bit more dire. It's concerning that Disney owns beloved franchises like Star Wars and Marvel, but video games are different. Games like Valheim, Stardew Valley, Minecraft, Among Us, these were all made by sometimes even just one person. A handful of people created these insanely popular games without that much money or resources or funding, and they have made millions. And Minecraft has gone on to be like the most popular game ever. The barrier to entry to making games is super low, especially compared to making a movie. Like, engines are free to use, you don't need actors or sets, and computers used to run these games and develop these games, like, I could do it on my computer right now. These games take time and money to make, but relatively little resources can result in a massive success. The most popular movies are typically blockbuster, gigantic action movies that cost $100 million to make, whereas recently the most popular games have been these small indie games like Among Us and Valheim. I have hope for the future of games regardless of how many studios get bought up by Microsoft, because you have people like Eric Barone, Concerned Ape, who just make Stardew Valley by themselves, and it's this beautiful game that millions of people love, and he just did it. I've put 25 hours into building up my Viking settlement in a game with my friends made by 5 people, and it's sold 5 million copies. That doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about these acquisitions. I don't think that it's good that Microsoft owns Doom and Elder Scrolls and Fallout. I think that's probably a pretty bad thing. But video games will persevere, and the best games will continue to be the games that are made by a guy and his friends in his bedroom versus the game that is made by 1,000 people with $100 million. Things do look pretty dire in the corporate world right now, and pretty soon there will be like 3 companies that own everything. But video games will live on. All right, that's all I have for this very long and dry video. If you enjoyed it, obviously leave a like. I would love to hear what you think about it in the comments, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.